Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming and welcome to the Martha's Vineyard Commission Housing Action Task Force. Today is Wednesday, October 23rd, and we are presenting the 2024 Housing Needs Assessment for the island of Martha's Vineyard. And we are delighted tonight to have with us Senator Julian Cyr and his staff member, Colin Hennessy. And Senator Cyr, we've invited him here to talk about the new seasonal communities designation, which was just passed as part of the Affordable Homes Act that Governor Healy signed into law in August. And this landmark designation gives our region new tools to tackle our housing issues, which we will be diving into when we get into the assessment. So Senator, if you would like to kick us off and give us a brief overview of the amazing seasonal communities designation. And I would like to preface this by thanking you for your advocacy on this. You've been an incredible housing champion for our region, and we are well aware that the reason that this designation passed into law is partially due to your tremendous advocacy and to the work of your dedicated staff. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura, and really thank you and Adam and the entire Martha's Vineyard Commission staff and the board who just are. We couldn't have better partners on what is the most acute and urgent and challenging issue facing Martha's Vineyard and the entire region. We went into this legislative session with I think two very big goals from a Martha's Vineyard perspective. One was to realize the ability for towns to come together and address housing, right? To have essentially a housing bank or some sort of form of that. Islanders, many of you on this call, worked hard, lobbied, made tremendous progress in all 6 towns on the island, and helped us move forward. And then the second goal was really about how do we come up with a revenue source to fund the work that we need to do. We really are in a predicament. I mean, I really think of it this way, where we're basically going to have to, given the current the state of our housing market, both for home ownership and for rental, we're in a predicament where, year-round working people on the island and across the region can't afford and won't afford, certainly to purchase a home, where property values have increased by over 100% in just a few short years, or even be able to afford rents when the entire housing market is geared towards a luxury tourism market, right? Second, third, fourth homes. The value of our properties is really based on what they rent for by the night in July and August, and that's far eclipsed from what local people can afford, right? I'm in this boat too. I'm someone who rents, and so that we're gonna have to figure out, right? How do we subsidize housing for most all year-round working people who don't yet own a home or gonna inherit a home? And that is a very complicated process for our relatively small municipalities to pursue, and it's also a very, really expensive process. And so we work in concert with all of you and a whole host of stakeholders across the region to really zero in on how do we really figure out how do we figure out the tools, the authority for us to move forward on year-round housing. And so what came out of that was this concept of what we've called a seasonal communities designation. And the idea of a seasonal communities designation is essentially for communities like ours, right? Whether you're West Tisbury or Truro or Chatham or Nantucket, we have these population swings, right? We have a lot more people who are here in the summer months. We have a seasonal economy. We have a seasonal fluctuation of our visitors, and our housing market is really driven by a luxury second, third, fourth home market. So the idea was that, look, if you're a community that meets this criteria, like the Cape and Islands, also perhaps the Berkshire, the Southern Berkshires, maybe a few other places in the state, that you need a unique set of tools that other cities and towns just don't need. And so that all kind of came up in this concept of a seasonal communities designation, thanks in no part to, thanks in small part, not no part, thanks in a very large part actually, to Islanders advocacy with Governor Healy and her administration. The governor, in her version of the Affordable Homes Act, proposes a seasonal communities designation. The House sustains that proposal. and the Senate expanded it very significantly. And then what was in the final Affordable Homes Act that came out of conference on the last night of the session and it was signed into law by the governor includes the Senate's seasonal communities designation. And I want to walk you through kind of the various components of what this is. And it's a lot, and then we can talk about the work that lies ahead, which is, of course, the revenue component. So what's in seasonal communities designation? First, this allows the seasonal community to establish a year-round housing trust without having to go through the cumbersome and lengthy home rule process. Effectively, what all 6 towns on the island requested with the housing bank home rules effectively by town, it was basically an island-wide home rule for a year-round housing trust, a mechanism that could deploy resources, yes, for capital A affordable housing, but also for subsidizing year-round housing across the income span. So this is established in seasonal communities. There's explicit language that actually allows communities to pursue this through intermunicipal agreement. So we believe that the year-round housing trust can realize this goal of a housing bank without having to pursue at least the structure of a housing bank. We'll get to the funding part of it later, without having to go through the home rule process. So this is a big deal. What it also does is it defines the term attainable housing in law, which is the first time we've done this in Massachusetts. And really it basically establishes that concept. It directs HLC to promulgate regulations to essentially prioritize housing where there's a mismatch between our area median income and the inflated cost of housing in the region. So first, year-round housing trust. Second, a seasonal community may acquire year-round housing occupancy deed restrictions or year-round deed restrictions to build middle income, middle market housing. So this is a really sort of key tool. If you look at the places where we've looked for inspiration, the Colorado ski towns, communities outside of Lake Tahoe, what have they done? They've had a transfer fee on real estate transactions, and they've used those dollars to purchase year-round deed restrictions, both on existing, the existing units that exist and on new ones that are built. And without a year-round deed restriction and a uniform year-round deed restriction, we would have really kind of had some difficulty in implementing this. Province on Truro and Chatham have all gone through the home rule process. We're going through the home rule process to establish the year-round deed restriction. This is in seasonal communities. We have this. We have this. Seasonal communities also are enabled to acquire and develop housing units for their employees. This is something specifically that came from the island. Edgar Town's been struggling to find housing for their sewer workers, but we're hearing this from across our towns who are employers and who are trying to figure out how do they provide housing. When I was on Nantucket last week with Housing and Livable Communities Secretary Ed Augustus, we heard from the director of the DPW and 2 of their employees in the DPW. 3 of the 35 employees in the Nantucket DPW were homeless this summer. They were living out of their car, right? It's unacceptable. The Affordable Homes Act through seasonal communities designation is going to allow our communities to provide housing for municipal workers. It also, the seasonal communities also allows us to acquire and develop housing units for artists and folks involved in the creative economy. We enable a few revenue tools in this, specifically related to municipalities within seasonal communities are able to increase the residential property tax exemption, which is for primary homes of year-round residents. The current threshold for that is at 35%. Seasonal communities can now go to 50% in their year-round residential property tax exemption. We think this is the tool that's going to become more and more useful 5, 10, 15 years down the road, where essentially, you're able to look for a revenue source directly from town meeting without increasing costs to year-round residents. Then there are several other kind of provisions related to some zoning requirements here. There's just several sort of mandates that actually we borrow from what towns have done. Folks may recall the merger lot bylaw that Oak Bluffs pursued last spring meeting. Seasonal communities are required to have bylaws that allow the construction on undersized lots, on merger lots, and then also encourage tiny home construction. So that's going to help, again, with just some more tools to sort of have infill, build out our communities. And then the seasonal communities designation. If you have a seasonal communities designation, these communities are required to conduct a biannual housing needs assessment so that we have much more accurate forecasting and planning. This is work that the Martha's Vineyard Commission is already doing, and we're able to do this. It can be done through the regional planning agencies as well to sort of provide some assistance for communities. Also within seasonal communities, we established a seasonal communities advisory council with the purpose of advising and recommending policies for to address livability and housing within communities like ours. So this advisory council is going to be very helpful. What's next? So as we look forward, HLC is directed by the law to promulgate regulations to realize seasonal communities. We expect that HLC is going to come out with draft guidance and draft regulations by early winter. Hoping sometime in December we'll see draft regulations specifically for the year-round housing trust. We've asked them to prioritize the year-round housing trust. This is something many of our towns have been waiting to have this vehicle. We want to get this vehicle to you as soon as possible, and then also providing guidance how towns can pursue year-round deed restrictions, the municipal housing, model bylaws related to undersized lots, merger lots, tiny home bylaws as well. So that's kind of what is ahead immediately. We also, going back to how do we really solve this problem? We need a series of tools that we can that essentially enable us and provide our municipalities and communities with the authority and the ability to subsidize housing for year-round people across the income span. We also need a revenue source to pay for it, right? We got to figure out how we pay for it. I think all of us, I hope, are really in agreement that a transfer fee on real estate transactions over a certain threshold make all the sense in the world. The vast majority of real estate transactions that are occurring on island, that are occurring across the Cape, across Nantucket, these are, not primary residences, right? These are not being bought by islanders or Cape Codders. Many of these folks aren't even Massachusetts residents. Transfer fees are widely used. The majority of the states have a transfer fee in effect. This is the sort of not novel policy. If anything, Massachusetts is an outlier here. We were not successful in securing a local option transfer fee in the Affordable Homes Act. A lot of that had to do with, I think, a political dynamic between the chambers. I think we had expected the House to pursue it. They didn't. They pursued another policy. I think the Senate was hesitant to pursue another policy the House had wanted. A lot of this kind of gets into negotiations between the chambers. But I'm really committed to keep advancing this issue. We have Governor Healy, who strongly supports a local option transfer fee. We have our business community here. The Vineyard Chamber, the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce, the Nantucket Chamber of Commerce, all sort of clamoring for this. And really, this is kind of part of a revenue strategy that we've taken in the region to figure out how our visitors and seasonal residents help pay for the really big problems we face. One example of that has been the Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund. The Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund, which I co-authored in 2018, establishes a 2.75% surcharge on all room occupancy, hotels, motels, Airbnbs, puts it into a dedicated fund that our communities can draw on. All the Cape Cod towns were automatically put into the fund. In the first 4 years of the fund has generated $204 million in other people's money to 8 towns across the Cape. This is a big game changer in financing wastewater projects that have been kicking around, have been proposed since I was in high school. And we're finally really seeing these projects move forward. Island communities have the ability to join into the fund. I know the commission's been working with Up Island towns on that, and with some of our other, the Down Island towns too. So that's sort of an opportunity, right? But I think the example of the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund is that this is a way that we're basically we're helping to afford our wastewater problem with our visitors contributing, right, with our seasonal residents contributing, and a transfer fee is very much in the same vein. The Affordable Homes Act has a whole host of really good things in it, right? This is a big deal of a bill, but it's just the start. If you look at the challenge of what we face across Massachusetts, we need to build about 200,000 housing units by the end of this decade. If you look at what's happening demographically in the state, people 25 to 44 are leaving Massachusetts. This is my cohort, right? We're talking about pretty educated people who have some mobility, who are making good salaries, who are leaving the state. They have plenty of employment opportunities. They like the values of the state, but they have no hope of being able to afford to purchase a home, right? To be able to build equity. The game has fundamentally shifted. The game has fundamentally shifted in housing. I'm really grateful for the partnership of Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, who see this issue as clear-eyed as we do. And I plan to continue to be pushing to realize this tool, and realize more policies that we're going to need, and policy change that we're going to need to truly address housing across Massachusetts, including on Martha's Vineyard, on Nantucket, on Cape Cod. So in some seasonal communities, essentially is the tools that you had all asked us for, to be able to, or rather the policy tools, the regulatory tools that y'all had asked us for to deliver on year-round housing, is a very significant first step. We are very lucky to have secured this in the final bill. Many other very good, worthy policies fell out of this bill at the end of that negotiation. Seasonal communities stuck in there, and it was in there because of the efforts of islanders, yes, from Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, joined by a few Cape Codders, right? Quite literally coming to Beacon Hill, telling our stories, really explaining and making the case, and sort of debunking the myth and the perception of what our communities are, and really conveying the real true needs we have. So this is something we should be very proud of. We could have not done it without each and every one of you, and the really sustained activism and coordination. It's made a difference. Very excited for the implementation of seasonal communities. Very eager to learn what else more we can do under that seasonal communities umbrella. And I'm really fired up to get a transfer fee done this session. And I know, and my colleagues know, that when this happens, it's going to be thanks to Islanders in no small part. So, Laura, I'm glad to take questions if folks have it, or whatever makes sense in your agenda. But certainly wanted to come and just give folks a real status update overview of this very significant accomplishment, and then what lies ahead, because we've got quite a bit of work here left to do.
Thank you so much, Senator. Adam, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just, Senator Sears being, the island should get a lot of credit. I just want to point out to the people that the seasonal community designation came from the islands and Cape Cod, exactly the places that Senator Sear represents. It wasn't on anybody's radar. It wasn't a concept that, over the governor's bill or other things. It came from us. And it came from municipal workers. It came from other things. And we knew that we might not get the transfer fee. And we had to have something else. If we didn't get it, maybe they would give us something else. And it couldn't be just a shell, like the rural policy development, which is a shell, and there's a commissioner, and so we put some policies in it. And Laura did a great job, along with the Nantucket people and the Cape people, and Senator Sear, who championed it. So I just want to tell you, this is a lot like the Cape and Islands Water Trust, where these kind of reforms or innovations are happening here. And again, we supported it by all the people that went to Boston to get into that stuff, and all of the work that staffs did with Senator Sear's staff. Tremendous amount of work was done in the background to get this thing through. And Senator, I want to publicly thank you for your leadership on it. It wouldn't have gotten done without everybody's sort of handle on it.
Thank you, Adam. And I'm like really proud of this one, right? Like I'm living this too, guys, right? I mean, my home ownership plan is like, I need to get a boyfriend or a husband who, has one of those like tech bro salaries or something, and makes, I don't know, a lot of money to do whatever they do. You know, and I've seen, you know, just last summer I counted 17 friends who left Provincetown and left Truro because they had to leave before the summer because they lost their housing, right? So, you know, I very much feel this. This is very much like in part why I ran for office. I'm really encouraged by what we've been able to do. I'll tell a fun little anecdote. You know, so we're reconciling these bills, and we had a pretty rocky landing at the end of the session, right? And at one point, the housing bill almost fell apart. So at the end of the night, right? At the end of the night, it's like 5:30 in the morning, right? When this bill's reconciled. My colleague Will Brownsberger, who's the lead negotiator for the Senate, is going to give a quite bleary-eyed speech on sort of what's in the final bill. And he wrote down all his notes, right? And it was like policies. And I saw the paper. The first policy that was listed and mentioned on Senator Brownsberger's list was seasonal communities. They knew how important this was for us. They couldn't leave Islanders and Cape Codders in the lurch with nothing. We need to come back and get this transfer fee done, and we will. But you know, I think that should be really reflective of really, I think, the extraordinary collaborative approach that we've all taken to make some serious headway on this.
Thank you, Senator. I think we'll hold any more questions until the end, and I know the senator may have to log off, but as he mentioned, regulations are expected to come out in December for seasonal communities with full or preliminary regulations in the middle of December, with full regulations coming out in the spring. So I think what we'd like to do, if possible, Senator, maybe bring you and your legislative director back in December when the guidance is released so that folks can ask specific questions. And in the meantime, the senator's office is available. Meg Ramirez, his legislative director. We're in very direct contact with her. I know the towns are sending me a lot of questions, and I'm corresponding with Meg to make sure that those questions go into the list that the Secretary of Housing's office is considering.
Yeah, I have an outstanding team, including Meg Rivera and Colin is here, and Kathleen Patron. I think we're also really all ears for like, one, I think feedback and what this policy is going to look like. I feel pretty good that we basically drafted like draft regulations for them, and I think they're going to be pretty consistent with what we were hoping to be. But one, I think we want feedback as the regulations and guidance, you know, come through. I think then we're also really interested in like, what else can we do here? I mean, the fact that we have this seasonal communities designation now established as a framework is going to, my hope is that this really allows us to, you know, what are other things that we haven't done? What are other kind of pieces that we need? I'm very clear I mean this revenue piece with a transfer fee, but I'm really all ears for what else that we need. What are other tools, carrots, sticks, incentives, creative things that you wish you could do that you can't. We really want to hear this, and I'm hoping the Seasonal Communities Advisory Council is a real forum for that. I was appointed by the Senate President to serve on this council, right? I have a lot of, it's like my baby, right? So I'm not, we're going to stay really engaged here, but really view this as sort of the start of this policy work. And I think we're really looking for other opportunities. We will come back and do another housing bill, hopefully this next session. You know, so just very much all ears.
Thank you so much. And just so Islanders know, my understanding is that that I am being appointed to the Seasonal Communities Advisory Council as the representative for the Regional Planning Agency. So community members and local governments will have a direct line into the Advisory Council through the Martha's Vineyard Commission.
Yeah, so we put right in the law, we were like, look, you have the regional planning agencies have to have a seat on the advisory council, right? If you don't have that coordination. And really just, I'm going to say this because I think I'm going to have to chop up. I'm toggling between a phone bank for Harris Walsh that I'm hosting for Massachusetts in this meeting. So I don't know how long I'll be able to stay, but the Martha's Vineyard Commission, I mean, y'all have been phenomenal. And Adam, just thank you for, you know, being such a good partner and working on like so many tough issues with us. And Laura's expertise has just been so essential in my framing and understanding of this and making the case and understanding what we're trying to do here. So y'all haven't, and I see all these other people, and I'm not going to start naming names beyond that because then we'll be here all night. But really, y'all are rock stars and are like, you know, doing the most on housing and really meeting the moment. And you should feel very, very proud of that. I'm very proud of that. And I'm just thrilled we can keep working on this.
Thank you so much. So with that, I think we're going to move to the presentation. and thank the Senator and Colin for coming. And so this presentation is on the 2024 Housing Needs Assessment. As the Senator mentioned, this is now going to be required for all communities that are designated as seasonal communities in the Commonwealth. We have a leg up because we have our first update. There was an original one done in 2020. We just updated this with 2024, and the Commission will be doing this now every 2 years going forward to comply with state law. So I will tell you, this is my first ever PowerPoint that I have put together myself. So I'm hoping that it works. I've also never presented this on a Zoom call. So again, we hope it works, and please forgive me if there are any technical glitches. Lucy is here to bail me out. What I think we're going to do is we're going to go all the way through the PowerPoint. It is 20, I think it's like 20 slides. And then we're gonna hold questions to the end. So if you have questions, please feel free to jot them down or drop them in the chat if you have no place to jot them down, and we'll take questions at the end. This whole meeting is a 90-minute meeting, so we started at 6:30. Our goal is to finish at 8 p.m. We can go over 10 minutes or 15 minutes if people want to stay for more questions. I know this is a lot of information to unpack, but we are going to try to land the plane at 8 so people can go off and have their evenings or go to bed, whatever you choose. So with that, Lucy, if I can I screen share?
Yep.
Do I have,
Yep.
I can just go ahead and share?
Yep.
Okay, let's see if this works. Share. Oh my goodness, can everyone see this?
Yep.
Okay, so let me collapse this. Collapse that. Okay. Okay, housing needs assessment, here we go. Whoops. Let's see, how do I go to the next? Oh, there we go. How do I go to the next slide? Okay, so why undertake a housing needs assessment? To gain an updated understanding of the range of housing needs, to understand the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on our inventory, most importantly, to provide a data-driven analysis so that we can offer conclusions, key findings, and targeted solutions. A lot of the information in this report, and it's an 80-page report, a lot of the information, we knew anecdotally what was going on, but we needed to have hard data so that we could actually quantify what's happening and get a better understanding of the steps that we can take should we choose to address the problems. And these are just some notes so everyone's aware. Data is all for Martha's Vineyard unless otherwise specified. Some of the numbers are rounded. If we had something that said like 2.85, we rounded it up to 3 just for digestibility. The housing needs assessment has all of the data in its source form with annotations or notations of where the data is from. So if you have time and you'd like to read that document, I encourage you to do so. And American Community Survey data is based on samples of the population averaged over 5 years. Okay, so here are some definitions, just so we all understand what we're talking about. And these are definitions that are based on state definitions and some that are based on regional definitions that are emerging. So affordable housing, that's capital A affordable. Those are units targeted to year-round households with income at or below 80% of area median income. And I'm going to get to what is area median income in a future slide, but I know a lot of us here deal with this on a pretty regular basis. So we're just going to zip through this fairly quickly. Community housing is 150% income. Attainable housing, this is a fairly new term, as the Senator said, it's appeared in legislation for the first time in the seasonal communities designation. For our purposes, we're going to refer to that as at or below 200% of AMI. On Nantucket, they are referring to it as up to 240% AMI. Workforce housing. This includes any of the above categories of housing, as well as non-AMI restricted units that are available to local working residents. So it's basically, workforce housing is anything that a working resident of Martha's Vineyard lives in. This includes employer-based housing, but is not specific to employer-based housing. And it may also include units for seasonal workforce where specified. Okay, so area median income for Dukes County. This is 100% of area median income. So this is the actual median. And here are the 1-person, 2-person, 3-person, 4-person, 5- and 6-person numbers. So this is calculated by Dukes County Regional Housing Authority. It's based on Novogradac's income and rent estimator, which is a tool that's used for calculating affordable rates. Oops, what just happened? Hang on one second. There we go. Okay, so capital A affordable housing is housing that's available to those earning up to 80% of AMI. This is what the state revenue streams will fund. So, and here are 80% household AMI limits. So when we're talking about public projects that are funded using public funds, our Community Preservation Act funds can go up to 100%, but state funding streams are limited to 80%. So for larger public projects, this is what we generally see as the cap. So as you can see, this is not representative of our entire community. So we are dealing with a missing middle situation, which we'll get to in a bit. So what does all the data show us? I'm not going to show you the 80 pages of data because we'll be here all night. So I invite you to read the whole report to see the data because it's quite extensive. And what I did was put together a summary so we can really see what is the data showing us. So the first thing is that increasing cost burdens, which were intensified by the pandemic, remain at unprecedented levels. They are not going down. They are not receding. 21% of our island households are now spending between 30 and 49% of their income on housing costs. That is considered cost burdened. And 19% of island households spend more than 50% of their income on housing costs. So overall, 40% of our island households are housing cost burdened. I think one of the more alarming figures that you can see in the report is that 70% of our households making $75,000 or less are cost burdened. And that is a huge proportion of our service industry workers and our critical service workers. So we need to be aware that that is a demographic that is being severely impacted by housing costs. Number two, increasing affordability gaps for homeownership, which have been intensified by the pandemic, also remain at unprecedented levels. So our median home price more than doubled between 2012 and 2023, went from 600,000 to 1.5 million. The affordability gap currently between what a median income household can afford and the actual median home price is $927,500. That's a lot. That's an insurmountable number. Our rental affordability gaps, which we had not previously quantified, and we'd gotten a lot of questions about that, are upwards of $1,000 monthly for households at 100% of AMI. That means 100% AMI household in a market rate rental. And those gaps go upwards for larger households as the family count gets larger. So a year-round one-bedroom market rate rental unit, according to the data that we've seen, is approximately $3,000 a month. So that is a number that we are working with. So what does the data show us about inventory? Number one, the year-round housing inventory remains substantially smaller than the seasonal inventory, and it has not kept pace with population growth. So our year-round housing inventory stands right now at 39% of our overall inventory. That is very small. Number two, despite an increase in year-round rental units since 2012, an overall shortfall of year-round rentals is driving housing insecurity at all income levels, destabilizing the island's critical service infrastructure and the island workforce. So it used to be that a higher level of income meant a lower incidence of housing insecurity. What we found through the data is that for rentals, that's not the case anymore. And the housing insecurity is affecting all of our income levels. That's a huge problem because there's difficulty attracting and retaining professionals, including medical professionals, as we know, public safety, law enforcement, etc. Number three, and this was a really distressing find, but the data backs it up. The island is actually losing what's called naturally occurring affordable housing units much faster than we're producing deed restricted replacements. So naturally occurring affordable housing, you'll see that right there. The acronym for that is NOAH, N-O-A-H. What that is housing that is owned or resided in by low or moderate income residents at a price that's proportional to their income. That means that they're not paying more than 30% of their income on housing costs. And that's just the cost of the housing. So most of what these units are ownership units that were purchased by folks 20, 40, 50, 60 years ago, or inherited, where the upkeep of that property fits comfortably within their income. Historically, the island has actually had an incredibly diverse range of socioeconomic groups owning homes here. Very diverse economic profile. That is disappearing. And when someone exits the community and sells a home, or when someone passes away and the home is sold, that unit is not staying in that socioeconomic range. It's flipping to the upper end of the socioeconomic range. Census data suggests a shortfall of approximately 2,775 year-round housing units. That is a real number that is based on census data. 657 rental units, which is the number suggested by the people actually here on the island. What that 657 does not represent are folks that we've lost because they've been forced off island by losing their housing. And then 2,118 ownership units, which is, I know, an enormous number, and that reflects the cost-burdened homeowners that we have here on the island now who are at risk of leaving because they can no longer afford to maintain their homes, or will be exiting the community as they, as they sell and retire. Okay, so what does the data show us about community impact? Number one, what I just talked about, the island's socioeconomic diversity is eroding, and it's eroding quickly while our income disparity is increasing. For those who saw the Martha's Vineyard Times article, and you can see this in the report, they printed one of the data points from the report that shows that the number of homeowners, the percentage of homeowners who make over $200,000 has quadrupled in the last 10 years. And now approximately 20% of our year-rounders are making over $200,000 a year. And I will show you the graph later that illustrates that, but it's quite a huge shift from just 10 years ago. Rising inequities among the town populations are becoming more pronounced. This is really important, and I will show you this data point later. In 2012, the median income among the towns was like pretty level. It was fairly similar across all the towns, within like $20,000 or $30,000. That's completely changed, and we now have Tisbury's median income is 2.5 times smaller than Chilmark's median income. And we're talking about year-round community. This does not include seasonal residents. These are year-rounders. Number three, this is really important. Homelessness is a growing problem, threatening the health and well-being of an increasing number of individuals and families. This includes working islanders at a variety of income levels and their children, and an increasing number of seniors. This is where I was mentioning before that having a good paying job, if you're a renter, does not mean that you're housing secure anymore. And we are seeing more and more community members who are fully employed winding up homeless. Okay, so how did we get here? Number one, we have very limited housing type options due to our zoning restrictions, mostly single family homes. Most of our inventory is single family homes, over 91%. Multifamily units are prohibited in most of our zoning districts, and we have large minimum lot sizes on the whole. Number two, desirability of location combined with what we call the pandemic effect. And that includes a combination of resettlement, that's folks who moved here during the pandemic, and the rise of remote work. Not everybody left. And a lot of folks who bought houses and are now have now moved back to the mainland have kept the houses they bought and are using them as what real estate agents are now calling primary, secondary homes. That means folks basically have two homes, one on the mainland and one here, and remote work allows them to go back and forth between the two. So we are not seeing any kind of release of inventory after things settle down after the pandemic. Number three, slow local governmental response and limited local governmental capacity. We have rural volunteer governments. We do not have, we do not have paid mayors and paid city councils. So volunteer governments can only do so much. And I think there's we're seeing housing crises handled differently where there is professional government. And one of the reasons that things have been slow is because our volunteer governments do have limited capacity. Number 4, unregulated proliferation of short-term rentals. When the report came out, we clocked 3,999 short-term rentals. Since the report, since that data was done in 2023, the number's gone up to over 4,000. Avenue Insights and Analytics did an assessment for us in 2023 and came up with the average nightly rate for a short-term rental of $931. So there's a huge incentive to rent short-term as opposed to long-term. So if you look at the difference of the numbers, over 4,000 short-term rentals, only 1,641 year-round rentals. So this is important to understand, and excuse my line drawing. I could not figure out how to do a square, but I think it's a little more dramatic. And it's important to understand that this is the classic trajectory of American resort towns and rural locations. We see this everywhere. This is not unique to Martha's Vineyard. So because we're following a classic trajectory, we can look to other towns that are further along the trajectory and understand what's coming and understand what they've done to moderate or mitigate impacts, what they haven't done that could have been done, what we can choose to do differently so that we can get a different outcome. So what we do know from what we're seeing is that the folks who are succeeding in addressing this have dedicated intentional long-term strategy that is complex. It is not a silver bullet. There's no one size fits all. It's a lot of moving parts to address the problem, and it absolutely requires increased professional governmental capacity. Nantucket has not only a housing director, but a housing department, a professional department. Falmouth has a housing director. Provincetown has a housing staff. The town of Brewster has a housing director. Other communities in the Western ski towns have entire divisions devoted to this. So in order to understand, in order to move forward, it's really important that we understand that the communities that are addressing this, that are our size or even smaller, have professional governmental divisions that are devoted to this, just the way they have divisions devoted to wastewater, just the way they have a DPW to keep the roads fixed and plowed, and just the way that they're handling anything else that would require professional support. So Martha's Vineyard's median home price is currently 1.5 million. So to understand what's happening in other communities, we are actually kind of at the bottom. So we're still on our way up. So it is likely going to get a lot worse. Aspen, Colorado was at $1 million about 30 years ago. They're currently over $10 million. It's been fluctuating between 12 and 14 over the last couple of years, but it has not dropped below $10 million and is doubtful that it's ever going to. So 1/3 of their community is housed in deed restricted housing, and they put enormous strategies in 30 years ago that they've added on to over the last 30 years. Nantucket, our sister island, is now at 3.5 million. About 8 years ago, they're where we are now. So we are classically 7 to 8 years behind Nantucket. So following what Nantucket is doing and what they're doing to address housing issues is incredibly important. Ketchum, Idaho, which is Sun Valley, where I used to live, way back when it was a cheap place to live, $2.5 million. Jackson Hole, Wyoming, another popular ski area, 2 million. Vail, Colorado, which has really pioneered some really innovative solutions for housing, 1.5 million. Key West, Florida at 1.5 million. Okay, so now I've given you a lot of bad news. So here's a picture of my neighbor's horse. And we're gonna get to the actual data, go over some existing tools, and then we'll start talking about some new ideas. So here's our existing housing stock based on ACS estimates. ACS is the Census's American Community Survey. So in 2012, we had 17,140 housing units. The occupied housing units, that means our year-round housing units, is about 34% of our inventory. So 5,782. 2022, we had a small increase, 2.8% increase, 17,621. Our occupied housing units went up to 6,899, 39% of our inventory. So that looks good on paper, right? Because it means that we are gaining year-round housing units into our inventory. That was an 1,117 unit increase. So what this doesn't show us, and what the other data shows us, is the income levels that these new occupied housing units inhabit. And it is at the higher end. These are not housing units that came in at low, moderate, or necessarily in our local workforce. They moved into the higher end, and this is what the data is showing us, is that basically right here, the pandemic effect. It's folks who are moving here to get away from the pandemic and purchasing homes on the island. So here's our current population by town, just for a baseline. So 20,543 is our overall population, and you can see how it's split up. There's Gosnold down at the bottom, one of my favorite places to go. It says 38, there's really 12, but who's counting? So here's the really important piece, I think, that was so surprising and so many folks really commented on after the Times article came out and when we released the housing needs assessment, the preliminary report in June. So our income distribution has basically flipped between 2012 and 2022. So you can see that 73%, that's 40 plus 33% of our community was what's considered low and moderate for Martha's Vineyard in 2012. And that has gone down drastically, and essentially our low income and our high income residents, those percentages have flipped. And again, 20% of our residents are making over $200,000 annually. Here's our median income by town. This was really interesting for me when we saw this data. If you look back to 2012, which is the blue bars, there's fluctuation, but it's not an astronomical difference. This is sort of what we would expect. So Tisbury was on the low end at 56,000. Chilmark, this was surprising to me, was the second lowest at 61,818. And Aquina was at the high end, 91,875. So 2022 comes along, and look at the differences now between the towns. Tisbury is now at 65,789, so it has not moved a lot. Chilmark has shot up to 155,938. Keep in mind, this all represents year-round residents. This does not represent seasonal residents, which is why Edgartown, and this was very interesting also, is showing only at 79,127 for median income. So what that tells us is that the year-round residents of Edgartown, that's a pretty moderate range of income. So, you know, when we're looking at the needs that are served by housing in the town and increasing housing inventory, we can look at these numbers and understand, you know, what our population looks like. And also the difference between the towns, it's important to keep in mind when we're looking at housing solutions in different towns, you know, we need to keep track of these numbers, because if these numbers continue to separate town by town, you're looking at really huge impacts on the population of each town as you're trying to provide services and as you're also creating housing, repurposing housing, or retaining existing low and moderate income housing in that town. So right now I'm going to get a little bit into what are the tools that we've been using to tackle this. And then we'll get into what are the new tools that we've been provided and what can we do going forward. So currently, the Commonwealth has an expectation that 10% of our community's housing stock is included in what's called the subsidized housing inventory. This is something that was created under the 40B law, which is a very powerful tool at state level for creating affordable housing. So the SHI is the percentage of our year-round housing stock town by town that's deed restricted for households earning up to 80% of AMI. This can be either rental or ownership. Generally, this kind of housing is subsidized by state and federal programs. It's eligible for funding by state and federal programs and usually is subsidized. And the units have to be offered under what's called an affirmative fair housing marketing plan. So that piece is important because, as you'll see on the bottom, not all deed restricted inventory that a town has under 80% of AMI will qualify for subsidized housing inventory, or SHI. In small rural towns, we frequently wind up having privately created housing, like a single unit, an accessory dwelling unit, say, that's created under an incentive that a town offers. Like West Tisbury has offered for many years, an accessory dwelling bylaw where you're allowed to create an accessory dwelling unit if you deed restrict it to 80% or below. It's not really feasible or practical for a private individual creating one unit to afford to offer an affirmative fair housing marketing plan. It starts at about, my understanding, I've heard about $2,500 each time that the unit is offered. So while we do have additional deed restricted units under 80, not all of them are going to show up on the affirmative fair housing marketing plan. Public projects will show up. Habitat for Humanity projects are eligible, and a lot of other units that we have here on the island. So this is what our subsidized housing inventory looks like. This is basically our report card that the state looks at to see, are we meeting their expectations for what we're doing with affordable housing? On the left, the blue bars are our existing subsidized housing inventory units, and this is as of January 2024. So this reflects units that were on up through 2023. The next slide is going to show us the units that we have in the pipeline. But just so we're clear, the blue bar shows us what's on the state registry. The orange bar is what the state's expectation is. So you can see there's quite a difference in some of the towns. Aquinnah is the only town where their production of inventory has exceeded state expectations. So they're well over their 10%. They're at about 16% right now, and with new units in the pipeline, they're going to hit about between 19 and 20% in the next year. Chilmark has no units on the subsidized housing inventory. That doesn't mean that they don't have subsidized units, but none of them are deed restricted to 80% or below, so they don't qualify for the state inventory. Edgartown's, you can see, Oak Bluffs is getting up there, and they have units in the pipeline that's going to increase that number. Tisbury as well. And again, West Tisbury's is quite low. We'll see on the next slide. I know West Tisbury found a bunch of units that had not been filed, and they're looking to get credit on the inventory for that. So here's a chart that shows us what the actual percentages are. And again, the state goal is 10%. The state's expectation is 10%. So as you can see, Aquinnah, 2023, those are the official numbers. So if you were to look on the state subsidized housing inventory right now, what's published, this is all public knowledge on the state website, you would see those numbers in the top row for 2023. There's an additional 68 units expected to show up on the SHI in 2024, which will bring the numbers up a little higher to that bottom row. I will say the 0 that is showing for Chilmark, I just want to flag, I get asked a lot of questions about this at state level when we're talking about tools for the islands and what the communities are doing to address housing. And that always comes up. I always get asked, why does Chilmark have 0 on the subsidized housing inventory? So I think being able to bring a few units online in Chilmark that are recognized by the state will be a real help for getting support. And I do want to congratulate Chilmark on getting $1 million from the state, or close to $1 million from the state for Peaked Hill. And I think the state is hoping that they're going to see some subsidized units go into Peaked Hill. Oops, well, I did not mean to do that. What's next? Okay. I was doing so great. Let's see. Oh, wait a minute. Oh. Hang on one sec. Additional deed restricted units. Okay, sorry for the tech glitch. I knew that was going to happen. Let me make sure I didn't. Yeah. Okay. So additional deed restricted units beyond the subsidized housing inventory. The towns have been creating deed restricted units. Some of these are privately offered units. Some of these are Island Housing Trust units. Some of these are, other units that maybe don't make the SHI or are deed restricted to an income level above 80%. So we have an additional 105 units, which is substantial. 10 more units are in the immediate pipeline. And then we have a lot of additional units showing up in town projects and in proposed private projects. Okay, so now we're getting to the recommendations and strategy part of the report, and we are heading towards the end, and then I'll break for, we'll have time for questions and discussion. So the biggest takeaway from this report is that the numbers are just too big. We cannot solely build our way out of this. And this is an important thing to realize and have quantified in data. I think a lot of us were aware of this, but most state strategies and federal strategies focus on production, and that's producing new units. So it was really important for us to quantify these numbers and quantify our attrition, what we're losing into the high end of the market, and really make the case that we cannot solely build our way out of this. This is basically what the seasonal communities designation is designed for, is for communities that cannot solely build our way out of this. We need additional tools. So what does that mean? Intentional long-term regional planning is needed. As I mentioned before, we are on a trajectory that is pretty classic. So we really need to start planning not just 5 years out, but 10 years out, 15 years out, and 20 years out. And we have to do this really intentionally, and we have to understand what's happening across our entire island, not just town by town. So what does that mean? That means clear community goal setting by the towns and between the towns. And these are questions like, do we want healthcare, education, public safety, and other basic services based here? And again, these are decisions we have to make. Maybe we don't, maybe that's not important. Then we take one course of action. If we do, we need to understand that we have to take intentional and planned steps in order to keep those services here, because they will not stay here on their own based on the trajectory that we are currently on. The other thing is our goal percentage of housing year round. We need to be really clear of what we're aiming for. So if you look at our shortfall and goals, if you're using just the math, if we hit 54% of our inventory at year round, that's meeting the target suggested by the census data. That still leaves us a substantial amount of housing inventory seasonal. A 50-50 split is probably the best that we're going to hope for. Again, that's very reasonable. That's more reflective of what other communities are at. That still can sustain, that means that our year-round community can sustain our tourist economy if we're about at 50-50. Number two, understand the market pressures on existing inventory and remaining developable land. This is really important. The market is driving this, and the market will not solve the problem. So we need to understand what the market pressures are in order to create strategy. And that means, what are the market pressures now, and what are market pressures going forward? So we need to be continuously evaluating this in order to make informed decisions. Number three, this is really important. Targeted retention of existing year-round inventory. What the data shows us is that if we do not target retaining existing year-round inventory, and again, this is that income distribution chart, we will lose the inventory into the high end of the market. That is the trajectory that we are on. So seasonal communities designation is giving us new tools to target that retention, and it's really important that we put steps in place to actually make that an intentional and long-term strategy. Number four, target smart growth development and redevelopment to meet year-round housing needs while preserving open space and rural character. What does this mean? This means looking at infill, repurposing, cluster housing, long-term affordability, and or year-round deed restrictions. And I want to be really clear, this can be done in all the towns. When we say smart growth, we're not just talking about smart growth in the Down Island towns. We're talking about smart growth throughout all the towns, and this can be done maintaining rural character, and it will require zoning reform. Number five, targeted town-led partnership projects to address seasonal workforce housing needs. So this is something that we haven't done to date. It's something that was part of the 2018 housing production plans. We never really got there, but this is a really important piece for us to address. We need to relieve the pressure that seasonal workforce housing needs are placing on our year-round inventory. If we don't have dedicated seasonal workforce housing, then our year-round housing is the only thing that can, meet that need. Anything we can do to reduce the pressure, work with our business community to reduce that pressure is going to be incredibly effective. We're seeing this done in other resort communities, it's a hugely effective strategy. Nantucket is doing it, Provincetown is doing it, we're seeing the Western ski towns doing it. And we really feel strongly that the results of this data show that it's time for governmental initiation and participation as being essential to crafting solutions, and that town governments can bring the business community to the table and explore public-private partnerships or support and encourage private projects that the business community is undertaking. I'm not seeing this done anywhere where it's strictly led by the business community. The places this is really working, it's being initiated by the town. The conversation is being hosted and supported by the town. There's an understanding that economic health is central to the well-being of the entire community, and that seasonal workforce housing is part of that. And number 6, and this is really important with the we can't solely build our way out of this, we need to improve our commuter infrastructure. I think we're going to have to come to terms with the fact that we are going to have commuters. There are certain jobs where you can commute. There are certain jobs where it's really, really difficult, and we need to keep as many of those folks here and provide opportunities as we can. But we are going to be hosting commuters for part of our workforce going forward. And in order to keep folks working here when they are living off island, we need to improve our commuter infrastructure so that it works more efficiently. And that is the end of the slideshow. Click to exit. Okay. All right, so let me see if I can see everybody again. Oops. Oh, Lucy, I think I did
Or
something.
you just need to stop your share.
Okay. Stop share. Okay. All right, 30 minutes. Great. We have about 30 minutes left for questions.
I had a couple come in the chat while
Okay.
you were giving your presentation. The first one was up when you were talking about the housing burden statistics.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, is it 30% of gross or net income?
It's 30% of gross.
Okay. And then the other question was, how is year-round residency determined?
So the state just defined that for us. So Island Housing Trust has their own definition. I will call on Philippe in a moment. Philippe, I'll just give you a heads up. I'll ask you to define that. The state has just defined in the Affordable Homes Act that year-round residency is a minimum of 10 months of full-time residency. Sorry, it's primary residence, comma, minimum of 10 months of residency. And Philippe, can I call on you to ask how Island Housing Trust is defining this in your ground leases?
We define it as 11 months.
Great, thank you. David, does DCRHA have a definition?
No, because we're monitoring and operating under other definitions. All of our rentals, of course, are 12-month leases.
Right.
And the only question, that you and I have discussed is how to monitor 10 months.
Right.
And the financial aspect,
Mhm.
which the Colorado towns do, I think might work here, and that's basically showing income records for that 10 months. That's one way, but on a strict time, I'll be very interested to hear how that'll be defined and monitoring.
Mm-hmm. So I want to be clear too, thanks David, that the state's saying it's a minimum of 10 months. This does not in any way change Island Housing Trust ground leases or what they've been doing. That's 11 months. DCRHA's leases are 12-month leases. None of that changes. Towns can be more restrictive. They can't be less restrictive. They can't say that year-round is 8 or 9 months. Do we have more questions from the chat, Lucy?
So David, your mic, you just need to get a little closer to the microphone. A lot of people couldn't hear you. Does the housing needs assessment project island population growth by town?
It does not. That would be in the statistical profile, I think.
Yeah, I think it's in there too.
I think it's in the statistical profile. So if you go into the Martha's Vineyard website, that has a really granular breakdown of demographics in the 2023 statistical profile.
And then how are we defining housing units?
We are defining housing units as God, I don't have the written thing in front of me. All right, I'm going to try to do this from memory because I don't have it in front of me and I don't know which page it is on in the 80-page report. But it's a dwelling unit is, Adam, you may have to help me out with this because this is, MVC uses the same definition. It's cooking and sanitary facilities contained within a single unit serving a household. I hope I got that right.
Yeah, I would recommend you go to the report, and it is defined in the report.
Yeah.
I would suggest if you're interested in exactly, as opposed, Laura, not stopping you, but you're reciting.
That's probably a good idea. Okay.
There is a definition of it.
I think there was a question from Michael Kim. Michael, did you want to elaborate on why you were asking that? Maybe I can answer it.
Well, or just Michael, you need to look in the report. It does define.
Yeah.
Just bringing up in the discussion, is a 9-bedroom house 1 unit, and is a 200 square foot studio also 1 unit? And are we making them equivalent?
I think it depends on the context that you're asking this in. And since you just referenced a 9-bedroom house, and I know we have a hearing tomorrow that involves a 9-bedroom house, I'm going to say that sounds like a conversation to be having at the public hearing tomorrow.
Yeah, like I said, the definition is in it, and there's different definitions for different projects and other kinds of things depending upon the income and depending upon the kind of units there are.
So if you're asking how does the U.S. Census Bureau, what do they determine? How do they count? Because they're counting our housing units. So is that the question, Michael? Or is, because that I can answer pretty easily.
That'd be informative.
Okay. So the U.S. Census Bureau counts units as anything that's on an independent lease. So if you have a main house where you have someone residing in it, and then you have an ancillary or a tertiary structure that's on a separate lease, those are considered 2 different units, right? Single lease for each unit or single family unit that's in each dwelling. That's what the census considers a unit. So there are situations where you have, say, a main house and a guest house with a different family unit in it, and there is no rent being paid because it is a relative or it is a friend of the family's who needs a place to stay. That's still considered a secondary unit because it's a separate household. So the census counts that as another unit, which is why we actually had some data issues figuring out what our rent prices are, because the census doesn't count separate units that have no rent charged as any different from, a 1-bedroom unit that's somebody's charging $3,000 for. So when they calculate, according to the census, what's our median rent price, it's artificially pulled down to the low end because we have so many situations where someone is either paying a nominal fee or they're only paying utilities, or they're staying in, an accessory dwelling unit or a guest house or, an ancillary apartment, and either paying a very reduced rent or not paying any rent. So that's the census definition, Michael. I hope that helps.
What you said is that income levels are pulled down in the census. If you look at the census,
in the census,
those are artificially, well, maybe not artificially, but they're lower than what in reality because of the methodology that they use.
Yeah, not the income levels. The census, what the census considers our median rent. So we had to actually look at data and say, well, what is our actual market rate rent?
Right, median rent. I stand corrected.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Another question, what did you mean by infill?
Oh, so infill is infill, I think of it as sort of like turkey stuffing. So if you have an open space, it's what goes in the open space. So if you have, say, a downtown village district and you have a vacant lot, infill would be creating something in that vacant lot. It's also, if you have a single family home, it's what the state is intending when they passed the accessory dwelling units by right law, which they passed in August. Infill would be an accessory dwelling unit on an already developed piece of property in the already developed environment.
Right. It's the opposite of sprawl.
Right, exactly. Any more, Lucy?
The turkey stuffing was a good metaphor. Very memorable.
Thank you.
And I think that's all the ones that I've got. Oh, what tools
Okay.
might be used to retain existing year-round inventory?
Okay, so this would be a lot of the tools in the seasonal community designation are intended to target maintaining and securing existing year-round inventory. So year-round deed restrictions. This is something that Vail, Colorado created about 6 years ago. They've targeted trying to purchase year-round deed restrictions on 1,000 properties, and they're well on their way. I think they're over 200 right now. So what they did was they essentially created a dollar value for a year-round deed restriction in the same way that we have created a dollar value for a conservation restriction. So in the state of Massachusetts, you can purchase a conservation restriction on a property. The owner of the property is paid for that restriction. They can sell it or they can donate it if they choose, but they can be remunerated for that restriction. And then that restriction has, that property has a restriction on it that is in perpetuity. So the state of Massachusetts in August gave Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and the other quote unquote seasonal communities the right to create year-round deed restrictions. So we can now calculate a dollar value on what it would be worth if a year-round, if an owner decided to sell a restriction on their property to the town or another entity. And again, we'll have to create these programs. So we'll have to decide who's going to be the purchaser of that deed restriction. Where is the money going to come from? And this is all TBD, but at least we have the right under state law now, just like Colorado towns have had for decades, to create a program like this and do this. So purchasing a year-round deed restriction is a way to allow an owner to receive some remuneration. And again, this is all voluntary. Nobody has to sell a year-round deed restriction, but there's really nice incentives for selling a conservation restriction. And we expect programs to develop that'll create really nice incentives for selling your year-round deed restriction. Once you sell the restriction, your property would be restricted to year-round as defined by state and or local statute in perpetuity. And what this does is hold down the resale value of the property by approximately the same amount that you were paid out of the starting gate for the property. So Vail, Colorado has calculated that the cost of a year-round deed restriction is 22% of the sale price of the home. And that's been pretty consistent. They started at about like 18 or 19%. It's gone up to 22%. It's holding pretty steady there. Nantucket is launching a year-round deed restriction program. They've been working on a pilot. When the seasonal communities designation was signed, they got ready to launch. They have $2 million in seed money. They just put out their proposal to the town, and they're offering to purchase year-round deed restrictions on market rate small homes. This works a lot better with apartment size and condos because you get more bang for your buck for a unit that's maybe $500,000 or $600,000 than for a single family home that's worth like 1.2 or 1.5 million. So we're going to have to figure out how to translate this to our market, but it is a really powerful tool, and Provincetown is also getting ready to launch a pilot program. Another thing we can do that the towns here have already done, particularly Edgartown, has launched a pilot program about 10 years ago, what's called a buy down. That means that they purchase a property for market rate and essentially buy it down into an affordable price. So the town can purchase the property for market rate, reduce the price, and turn around and sell it deed restricted to the community. And this is a really commonly used tool. Buy downs work a lot better before your housing market gets completely out of control. So if we can ramp up our buy down programs, we can actually capture a lot of units into year-round deed restriction, but the longer we wait, the more expensive it will become. Towns that have started doing this when their units are about like $300,000, $400,000 have been really successful in capturing like large proportions into year-round deed restriction. So I would say those are probably the two most powerful tools. There's a lot of incentives you can provide also, tax incentives, et cetera. But as far as really locking them in, you need to somehow, get some kind of record some kind of a year-round deed restriction on it. The other thing before I finish is just to mention the community land trust model is another really successful way to do this. In theory, you can actually sell the land to a community land trust and retain your home. And then that home then, by dint of being on land that is owned by the community land trust, you lease it back for like however much a year for 99 years. And it's deed restricted in perpetuity. Every time the house sells, the ground lease is renewed. And that can be a really effective way to keep units in the community. Did I answer that sufficiently? Are there more questions on that?
We've got other questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Have we considered creating duplexes from existing housing by right in addition to ADUs by right?
I've considered that for sure. That's probably one of my favorite strategies. So that's something that the commission is working with Barrett Planning on an island-wide housing zoning analysis, which was hoping to have out last month. It's not quite done yet, but we're almost finished. And duplex conversion is in there as a zoning tool. Conversion is a really powerful tool, particularly in small rural communities, because you essentially don't really change the footprint of the unit, but you can convert, a home into two homes without essentially changing what it looks like. This is a huge strategy too for keeping our seniors here, helping folks age in place. We have a lot of people here who are overhoused, the same on the Cape and the same on Nantucket, and there are no downsizing options. So being able to convert into a duplex is a really great way for folks who are trying to stay in their homes to afford to do that, and also offer a second unit to a community member.
Okay.
Okay.
Next one is, where are we going to raise the necessary funding for the missing middle housing solutions?
Right. That's an excellent question. I'm so glad whoever asked that.
It was Philippe.
So it was Philippe. Okay. So the intent of the transfer fee was to provide that kind of unrestricted revenue stream that could be used for year-round deed restrictions at any AMI. The Colorado ski towns have been using a combination of revenue streams. One is a transfer fee. The second, which we don't have access to in Massachusetts, is a really robust local sales tax. The base sales tax rate in Colorado is only 2.9%. So communities commonly use a sales tax to raise substantial amounts of money for projects like this. We don't have access to that in Massachusetts. Currently, we also don't have a transfer fee. So what communities are doing now, and I think it's really important to look to Nantucket about how much money they have been spending to increase their year-end inventory and to secure the inventory that they have. And they are using general fund revenue. They're using short-term rental revenue through their general fund revenue. It all goes into the general fund, but they calculate the short-term rental revenue and they pull out a certain amount for housing. They voted and passed a $6.5 million permanent override that the taxpayers are paying to support housing infrastructure, and that's annual. And they also have been filing for a transfer fee since 2016. So we can also use meals tax. We do have an option for a local option meals tax. And I would note that only 2 of our towns are collecting a local option meals tax. All this revenue adds up. All of our towns were not at the full 6% for short-term rental revenue. The 3 towns that weren't, last town meeting voted to go up to 6%. So I think it's really important for towns to look at any revenue stream that they're eligible for that they're not currently tapping. That meals tax is really important. And that is unrestricted revenue. It's not deed restricted. It's not restricted to 100% AMI like CPA. David just put in the chat that Pitkin County, which is Aspen, Colorado, has a 2025 proposed budget of $255 million, with 3.5% of their proposed budget going to housing, and that's $8.9 million. So towns are using their revenue for this. John, I see you have your hand up.
Before John, Ann Purcell had her hand up first. Sorry, Laura.
Oh, sorry. That's okay. Sorry, Ann, I didn't see you.
So Ann, whenever you're ready, there you go.
You didn't see me because I sent a chat to Lucy.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So thank you. It's a two-part question. This piece that just passed this year in the state of Massachusetts about accessory dwellings.
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking what happens and how is it resolved if what you want to do with accessory housing bumps up against the individual towns' building restrictions? For example, Chilmark, 3 acres. Does the state law override the town restrictions?
Yes.
Okay, second part of that. Go ahead. Do you
On
want to?
February 2nd, I was going to say on February 2nd, then this is the provision that Ann's referring to as accessory dwelling units by right, which passed in the Affordable Homes Act. It goes into effect on February 2nd of 2025. On February 3rd, if a town has not brought its bylaws into compliance with ADUs by right, you can essentially go ask for a building permit to build an ADU. You are no longer bound by town bylaws. It defaults to the state regulation. So at the moment, though, I will say that my understanding is all of the towns are working on updating their bylaws to come into compliance with the Affordable Homes Act.
Okay, part 2. What happens when the accessory dwelling law, and this may be we don't know yet, bumps up against a homeowner association's restrictions?
We don't know yet, and we are waiting for guidance on that. I have asked that question of multiple folks, and we are still waiting for state guidance on that.
Is it possible that there won't be any guidance until somebody files a lawsuit?
Oh, no, we'll be receiving guidance on that.
Oh, great. Great. Thank you. That's encouraging.
Sure. Yep.
Although I must say that depending upon the guidance,
Right.
there may be lawsuits that will be filed after that.
Right, exactly. I will say that California wound up amending their state statute to specifically say that homeowners associations cannot disallow accessory dwelling units. So that language is not in the Affordable Homes Act.
Right.
So Massachusetts law is slightly different from California. So, but I do know it's part of the conversation. It's something that's being looked at, and we do expect guidance. And again, it may not stop lawsuits. So, but at least we'll have some guidance.
It may not stop lawsuits either way, depending on what the guidance is.
Right, exactly.
So an HOA could sue for restricting. An individual HOA resident could sue for, I want to build one. I don't really care what the HOA.
I think we're speculating right now, so it'd be best to wait until the state guidance comes out.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. John?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Philippe's question, and this may be stating the obvious, but all of the wonderful solutions that Laura has been talking about so eloquently, they are the purpose of the transfer fee. And it is incredibly inspiring to know, and we've talked to him repeatedly, that Julian Sear and our new rep, Thomas Moakley, are absolutely committed to the transfer fee that we've been working on for 4 years. So eventually, that will probably be there, and it will make a huge difference.
Thanks, John. So we have, there are 12 towns in our district, in our legislative district, that have already filed, and Senator Sear has asked the rest of the towns to file. So what we're hoping for is that this legislative session, we will see a filing from every single town across the entire Cape and Islands region. So we're looking at multiple avenues for a way that a transfer fee could pass, not just at state level, but as a backup potentially for this region. Thanks, John, for that comment. Any more questions, Lucy?
Yeah. So following up on the question about the definition of a unit, when the report says we need 2,700 more units, doesn't it need to be defined by bedrooms?
That's an interesting question. We haven't broken it down by bedrooms. The census count uses units. So I'll have to go back and contemplate that and then provide an answer. But it's almost 8 o'clock and I'm pretty tired. So my brain's not firing on full piston. So
I've
I
got
will
one
put a
more
pin in
question
that.
in the chat. And that's, is there a
Go.
good model that embraces the shuffle to create housing affordability through additional income rather than subsidy?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
Is there a good model that embraces the shuffle? And by that, I'm assuming they mean the island shuffle to
Okay.
create housing affordability through additional income rather than subsidy.
So I'm sorry, who asked the question? Because I think I have to
Yeah,
ask a couple
Michael,
follow-up questions.
can you clarify that?
Yeah, de facto, people do the shuffle to make it affordable because they gain extra income. Do we have a good model for that? That's
Because who gains extra income?
the homeowner if they
Okay,
rent out.
sorry, this is what
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about, the renter, like increasing. Okay,
But
so
the lessor gets the extra income and can afford to live in their house because they rent it out 2-3 months out of the year.
okay.
Is there a sanctified or a public or promoted way of doing that?
Well, so I think you're asking one question, and I'm gonna address a slightly different question that I think you probably should be asking instead. So as far as if I'm cost burdened and I'm in my home and I need to rent it out 8 weeks out of the year in order to stay in my house, me and my family in my house, and meet my mortgage, is there some kind of a way that I can be incentivized to stay in my house without renting out year round or without renting out short term? The answer to that is no, you can't.
or scenario, you build it that way and you get financed that way. So you can build something that's affordable to entry-level people because they can rent it out 10 weeks out of the year.
Well, so I think but I think what you here's a question I can answer. Okay. Is there a way that somebody who's, say, renting out a unit short term can be incentivized to rent it out long term? And the answer is yes. There are incentive programs that do that. Nantucket is doing one. Provincetown's doing one. It's a program called Lease to Locals. It's a subsidy that basically incentivizes folks who are renting out a unit, either short term or occasionally, to turn that into a year-round rental. It's usually town financed. On Nantucket, there's a private philanthropic group that offered to fund the first year until the town could identify financing for this. And it's considered a short-term program, usually done about like 1 to 3 years, in order to secure year-end housing inventory while the town is creating more permanent inventory. In some cases, the program is so successful, the towns just say, the heck with it. This is a tool we need in our toolbox. We're just going to keep funding this so that we can keep these units in our inventory.
The shuffle, and this is from somebody who did it, it's not healthy. First of all, where do you go? You have to leave the island
No,
for the 10 weeks.
It's tough, but
Well, I'm
it's
saying
a way to create naturally affordable, unsubsidized
I would say it's not natural to move out of your house 10 weeks. So we have to do better to help entry-level people on a different program basis. And that's my view of it. It's my wife basically told me what she would do if we shuffled again. So because we have kids, and to pull them out and to pack everything up was very difficult. And I understand what you're saying. I'm not being critical of you, but it's just a very difficult situation. And the question is, if you work here, where would you go for those 10 weeks? But we're getting far, Fall, I think, of Michael, what you're talking about. And you have proposed different ways to make that entry level affordable. And we do appreciate that.
We're at 8 o'clock. So I'm going to ask Lucy if there are any more questions in the chat.
We have cleared out the chat questions.
Fantastic. Okay. If there are no more, does anyone have any burning questions? I will take one more short question. And if not, I think I'm going to thank everybody for their time and call it a night. And if anyone has follow-up questions, feel free to email me, silber@mvcommission.org. As I mentioned, we will have the island-wide housing zoning analysis completed, we hope, in the next couple weeks. And we will set up a meeting to present that, provide that to all the towns, and then do another Housing Action Task Force meeting like this to field questions on that. Adam, do you want to say any words to wrap this up?
Just compliment you. You worked very hard on this report, and if you look at the report, it's very dense. If you dropped it on a table, it would break the table, which means that there's a lot of questions. But the thing, I think the takeaway that I would like to tell people is, we moved the needle a little bit, and we're starting to really look at different solutions. And there's no magic bullet, but through the work of the towns and other things, we're a little bit farther along the process than we were a couple of years ago. And we just have to keep working at it, continue to be innovative and develop solutions. We didn't talk about commuters. We didn't talk, about some other things, and maybe, Laura, in the next meeting that we have, we can just really start with some of the solutions and really look at what it is that we can do in the short and longer term. I think that might be helpful. Thank you again. Thank you, and thanks everybody for showing up. We appreciate that. And Senator Sear.
Yep. And Senator Sear, yes, thank you again to Senator Sear and Colin for showing up. Okay, I think we're going to call it a night, everybody. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
You know where to find me. Bye.
Night, everybody.